everyone, welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, tens of thousands of Japanese protest U.S. military bases after the rape and murder of a woman on Okinawa. Is the American military presence necessary? And as U.S. President Barack Obama's tenure winds down, his Trans-Pacific Partnership initiative remains stalled. What would its defeat mean for the region? And we begin today's show with news from Japan. The governor of Tokyo, Yoichi Masuzo, resigned last week after it was accused of using political funds to pay for antique art, holidays, and more. He has resisted calls to step down for months, but the scandal has become a potential liability for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's Liberal Democratic Party in the coming upper house election. People are also angry on the Japanese island of Okinawa, where a 20-year-old Japanese woman was killed on April 28th by a 32-year-old U.S. Air Force Base contractor. Tens of thousands of people rallied on Sunday to protest against this violent crime and the heavy U.S. military presence over there.
Protests in the heat. Thousands of people gathered in a park in Naha, the capital of Okinawa, last Sunday, to protest against the recent rape and murder of a 20-year-old local woman. A civilian employee of a U.S. military base was arrested in May. Details have emerged about the crime. Over 3 hours, the suspect waited to pick the victim, stabbed and strangled her, and then discarded her body.
After this horrible crime, I really feel we need to seriously think about how to remove U.S. bases.
I want them to leave Japan entirely.
The outrage has been bubbling for a while. U.S. servicemen in Okinawa have committed thousands of crimes over the years, although recent incidents have drawn more public attention, including another rape.
Similar accidents have often happened since the U.S. troops were deployed in Japan after the end of World War II. We Okinawans cannot suppress our rage any longer, and I can imagine that this kind of accident is not the last one to happen.
74.4% of U.S. forces in Japan are based in Okinawa. There are more than 30 U.S. military bases, including massive air bases in Kadena and Futenma. The Marine Corps' Camp Schwab is located in the island's northeastern region, and the Northern Training Area is the largest training facility in Okinawa. The island has demanded the reduction of U.S. bases for decades. With 20% of the island occupied by U.S. bases, Okinawans have lived next to the fences for a long time. Among the burdens they cite are stress from the noise and accidents and crimes caused by U.S. servicemen.
If the presence of the U.S. forces is based on the U.S.-Japan Security Agreement, we have to have a fair discussion and distribution of responsibility. Politicians and governments on the mainland say we need a security agreement, but they do not want ospreys flying over their cities or the presence of U.S. bases in their neighborhoods. It's contradictory, and why should we bear the whole burden?
The people of Okinawa say they are sacrificing their safety for the security of Japan.
As long as we have military here, the crimes will continue. We want the Marines out of here. They're trained to kill people. They're not protecting us. They're killing us. We do not want them here.
The bases in Okinawa are intended to protect against regional security, as Prime Minister Shinzo Abe moves to enhance Japan's role in global security. The strain between the national and local governments is not likely to be ended soon.
For more on the unprecedented Okinawa protest, we are joined here in the Beijing studio, Rick Dunham, who is a co-director of the Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University here in Beijing. And also, he previously served as the Hearst newspaper's Washington bureau chief back in the year 2009 and 2012. Welcome to our program. Also in our Beijing studio, we have Mr. Ye Hailin, who is with the National Institute of International Strategy of Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Meanwhile, joining us from Tokyo in Japan, we are having Professor Takasato Watanabe, who is a professor with the Department of Media Studies at Doshisha University. Professor, welcome to our program as well. I want to begin with you, Professor Watanabe, by asking you how much possibility is there when the chief cabinet secretary in Japan talking about revision of the so-called SOFA, which is a legislation important for American forces in Japan. How much is likely to change, Professor Watanabe?
That is a very important question. However, it is so difficult for Abe administration to change the details of the position of Americans and also American facilities in Okinawa, because the things which are explained to the people of Japan is so different from the realities. For instance, the military people can do anything in their own ideas, because textbooks even for the military people tell that Okinawan people must rely on the income through the military activities of US forces. And also the people who were retreated to the military forces are from the poor classes from America. So they think that the Okinawans are just like the colonized people, and they want to work hard for the military purposes because they want to get the scholarship for the universities like that. So this is a very structural matters, and it is very difficult to change everything in Okinawa.
Of course, Professor Watanabe was talking about perceptions, but besides perceptions, we're talking about a piece of legal work, which is called the SOFA. So maybe you want to explain to us, Professor Duncombe, about exactly what SOFA is and how important it is for the American forces now stationed in Japan on the U.S. military bases.
Well, what this does, the agreement allows Americans on the base, not just military, but others who work there.
It means a status of the forces agreement.
And it means that the laws that apply to other people living and working in Japan do not automatically apply to them. There are certain times in which the Japanese system, legal system, does not have jurisdiction over them. And this is obviously an issue when American forces are accused of crimes, and it is very sensitive politically. So there's a difference between the political issue here and the legal issue.
Right.
I do believe that there would be a chance to negotiate this, but it is so fraught with political peril for both the Japanese government and the United States that it will be difficult.
You talk about the political backgrounds a lot. Exactly what are you referring to? You probably want to elaborate a little more about that before we go to our next speaker.
So, well, let me just start with on the Japanese end. You have a double issue. People in Okinawa do not want the United States there, do not want the military people there, but there are also issues between...
It's only 0.6% of the whole national territory, and it is hosting 74% of all the facility of American military bases in Japan.
So you have that issue, but the second issue overlaid is Okinawa versus the national government in Japan. And so there are two sets of issues, and you have the Prime Minister of Japan is not in agreement with the government in Okinawa, even though it is very politically sensitive, with him not joining in the protests because he is thinking of U.S.-Japanese relations as well as his own. He is much more militaristic than the people in Okinawa who do not want the foreign military
So
there.
it's very interesting, Mr. Ye. The question is, what are the trade-offs? So let's take a look at these trade-offs. One is the U.S.-Japan relations, and Prime Minister Abe and his administration's, as well as his party, LDP's aspiration to change its status in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly regarding its war experiences and also its relations with its neighbors. The second thing is the immediate interests and safety security of the people in Okinawa, one locality of Japan, which of course did not belong to Japan for a long time. It was rather part of China for quite some time. So And then there's also the interest of the U.S. military bases, which has been in Japan for quite a long time. Well, the U.S. is thinking about its approach to Japan. It is also thinking about its ally relations with Japan to strengthen it. So we got different sets of interests all going on at the same time. Is that really reflected in the streets?
Frankly speaking, there is one theory, but applied for two perspectives. One is that the Okinawa people, whether they have the influence on the Japanese domestic politics, basically nothing. Because
what do you mean by that?
Because there's not many member of the Diet came from the Okinawa.
That's
so
right.
basically means the prime minister didn't came. This is not decided by the Okinawa. So why Shinzo Abe care?
So he can afford not to care.
He can ignore the complaint from the Okinawa. That's the first theory. Second theory is that whether his complaint towards the United States military base is workable or not, basically also nothing, because we all remember in 2009, the Japanese premier want to remove the military base from the Okinawa. What happened to him? He's gone. So also there is a history lesson for Shinzo Abe. If you want to touch the military base, somebody will touch your seat, and it's not affordable. So I think that based on the same reason, there is an influence issue. It's not only because of the whether who is right, who is wrong, whose interest is more important, it's because of whose influence is more decisive.
Professor Watanabe, do you agree with what the other two panelists in the studio have talked about from the Japanese citizens' perspective, particularly, and also the media, since you're a media scholar? What do you make of these logics? Eventually, what is likely to be the winning side of all of these debates and rhetorics?
The media in Japan are divided in two groups. One is represented the biggest newspaper by Yomiuri, and the other is the representative of the progressive Asahi. For instance, the demonstration composed of the 65,000 people several days ago, Yomiuri didn't write about that on the first page. They gave it the small space to the page 3, page 30. On the other hand, Asahi Progressive one gave the so big space on the front page.
Right.
So the readers of the Yomiuri, you see, they don't understand what's going on in Okinawa. This is a division of the public opinion. However, the intellectuals and other media, they are talking about how miserable the girl is, and also how poorly treated the Okinawans by the U.S. military people, and the relations done by Mr. Abe. So the public opinion is getting down and down for Mr. Abe. Now more than half are against Prime Minister Abe's coalition government.
I see.
This is reality.
Of course, the approval rating is extremely important for politicians in a country like Japan, but also some other numbers are also extremely important. A crime committed, for example, by the U.S. servicemen in Okinawa has long been a problem since the reversion of the Okinawa from the U.S. in 1972 to the end of last year. The prefecture saw around 1,500 crimes committed by the members and civilian workers of the U.S. forces and their relatives, averaging about 43 cases each year. Half of those are theft, and violent cases like injury or threatening bodily harm make up about 18%. 9.7% are vicious crimes like murder and rape. You got some number over there on our screen. So the question is, Mr. Ye, you've got these gigantic numbers. Of course, the public in Okinawa has been protesting for many times. But on the other hand, you also have, as we mentioned earlier, the mayor of Tokyo have to resign because of the corruption cases and many of the scandals. This could also be a big blow to the LDP party. So when all of these factors gather together, what does it mean for the party, particularly for the administration, Prime Minister Abe himself? As a result, Mr. Ye, will he give more attention at least to the real status of security here in Okinawa?
I think that the mayor of the Tokyo's resignation is quite more important for the Central Abe's politician career, but the Okinawa's people's demonstration is totally different. Again, it's just my point that the Okinawa's people's demonstration has no actual political impact towards the administration of the Central Abe, unless the Okinawa people can call the rest of the Japanese can stand up and to have some pretext to force Japanese central government to make some action. But such kind of thing never happened. That means the mainstream of the Japanese people, basically, they don't care about the Okinawa.
We all understand that what's happening inside the country always has to do with what's happening beyond the country's border as well. Earlier, Mr. Ye, we talked about Japan's complex at this moment, because on the one hand, it wants to change it politically, it wants to revise the Article 9 of its peaceful constitution. It already done that, yet with a lot of opposition from the neighboring countries, China, the Southeastern Asian countries as well, which were occupied by Japan during the Second World War. On the other hand, there's a rising China in the neighborhood. Japan wants to strengthen its allied relations, vice versa with the United States. So would that mean something different when it comes to Prime Minister Abe's choice when making political decisions?
If you ask the Democratic Party, they will be different. But if you ask the LDP, there won't be any difference, because for the Central Abe's political agendas to enhance the tie with the United States and also normalize his troops in Japan, it's the two sides of the one coin. So
and even more interesting, Mr. Ye, beyond that, let me go to Professor Watanabe. Professor Watanabe, would also, issues like this about the security of ordinary Japanese citizen be a bargaining chip for Prime Minister Abe when he's negotiating for better favor coming from the United States, or better recognition for his political stance? Be the case, and is it fair, Professor Watanabe?
The progressive media and also the people who can understand what's going on in between United States and Japan, also eastern part of Asia, let up half of the people, they understand clearly the structure of the situation. Of course, you see, so as to not to make the people understand correctly, some media are talking about the radical activities or too extreme military activities of North Korea, or they are talking about the territorial issues in between China and Japan and South Korea and Japan. But these are not reported correctly. So some group of the Japanese people understands the importance of American military power in Japan. However, all the people, or more than half the people of Japan, they don't want to have military bases within their territories.
Right.
They want to keep them in Okinawa. This is the segregation clearly by the Japanese people who are not well informed.
Very interesting. You got the internal politics going on. You also got regional conflicts going on, coupled with the regional relations and the allied cooperation in a way. So let me come back to you, Mr. Denham. Of course, U.S. is also having relations at this moment with Japan. We just saw the U.S. President Barack Obama for the very first time visit Hiroshima and eventually talked about that part of the history. We also saw Japan, United States strengthening its partnership and allied relations with Japan. U.S. was backing against Japan's sometimes unfair claims, as at least the neighbors saw about Japan. So what about Washington's position at this moment, with some of the military forces committing crimes, and that's a continuous problem? And at this moment, especially in the election year, with Donald Trump already saying, let's just withdraw from Japan and make sure the Japanese have nuclear weapons. Of course, whether his ideas agree or not is another question, but the thing is, what does it mean politically for Washington?
Well, this is tough politically. I mean, you can see with President Obama, when he met with Prime Minister Abe the last time, the number one topic was crime by Americans in Okinawa. Prime Minister Abe is using this as a bargaining chip to get what he wants from the United States in terms of military. In other ways, he sees it as potentially, even if the U.S. would back away, it is a way for him to enhance the Japanese military, to move more the way he wants to do it, to rebuild Japan's power after all these years. In the United States, it's a very sensitive issue because Donald Trump is saying, leave Korea, leave Japan, let them militarize. And so I think that the rest of this year you're going to have politics play out in the U.S.
Well, it's going to be a very exciting year, to say the least. Mr. Ye, final words from you.
Yeah, actually, why there's always crime because of the Japanese know they can't do anything, and the United States also know Japanese couldn't do anything. The most important thing is that the United States soldiers, they know nobody can touch them. So that's the reason. If you don't touch this reason, nothing will happen.
Right, and that's why the crimes continue. Yeah. We hope the best for the people in Okinawa, of course, and we hope some of these conflicts could be resolved as soon as possible. Let's just keep our fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Ye Hailin, Rick Denham, and Takasato Watanabe. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Appreciate it. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. U.S. President Barack Obama's Trans-Pacific Partnership Initiative remains stalled. Will anti-trade sentiment block any chance of ratification? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News, coming to you live from Beijing. The U.S.-led Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, trade deal is aiming to create the world's biggest free trade area. It is also an essential element of the legacy President Barack Obama is attempting to mold before he leaves office. But he faces strong political headwinds from Hillary Clinton and presumptive GOP nominee Donald Trump, whose opposition to the trade agreements could stymie a Republican-run Congress that's usually pro-free trade. Later, we'll discuss the chances that the TPP will be ratified or not by the U.S. Congress, and if it does take effect, what impact it might have on China.
Pushing the TPP. President Barack Obama made a plug on Monday for the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal.
To invest your business's precious resources
to a group of 2,400 investors looking at locating businesses in the United States, saying the deal would help boost the global economy. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a deal between countries that border the Pacific Ocean. It was first proposed in 2006. The United States and 11 other Pacific Rim countries have all signed the TPP. The list includes Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and Japan.
Set a new standard for trade and investment in one of the world's fastest growing and most dynamic regions.
Although the signing marks the end of the negotiation process, the member countries still have 2 years to get the deal approved at home before it takes effect. The potential effects of the trade agreement are stirring a heated debate, and China has come up often. China is not a TPP member, but is an important trade partner of all 12 TPP members. The Ministry of Commerce says China is open to any trade mechanism, so long as it follows WTO rules and is advantageous to the economic integration of the Asia-Pacific region. Experts say China should accelerate strengthening its industrial international competitiveness.
China should continue to develop bilateral FTA talks with neighboring countries. China needs proactive regional cooperative strategies.
President Obama wants U.S. Congress to ratify the deal before his time in office ends on January 20th. But in this U.S. presidential election year, the controversial TPP seems increasingly unpopular. Whether the TPP will be ratified in the U.S. remains a wild card.
More on the TPP. In our Beijing studio, I'm having Dr. Denise Konen of the College of Social Sciences and Professor of Economics from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Also joining us in the Beijing studio, Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics here in Beijing. Professor Liu, great to have you as well. So, let's cut right to the topic. When can we expect, Professor Konen, given your information from Washington, that TPP can be ratified in such a political year?
I wish I could give you a straight answer on that one. But however, I know President Obama is working very, very hard. He circled around with TPP partners, and he's going to put forth a full effort to try to get this agreement signed before he leaves. However, it is an election year, and the nation is very focused on who the next president is going to be. I think whoever that president is going to be will want to have an imprint on the TPP itself.
May I just follow up a little bit before I go to Professor Liu? What does imprint mean? That means let's just scrap the whole thing off and let's start a new thing, or shall I just add something to the original document? So
well,
what
that's
would that
a very
mean?
good question. I believe whoever steps into office will want to show that they really own the TPP process, that it is their initiative. That doesn't mean many things have to change, but maybe one or two significant things that reflect the character of the whoever takes
Professor
into
Liu, remember
office.
during the strategic and economic dialogue not long ago here in Beijing between China and the United States, there have been a lot of internal debates about what is likely to happen to TPP and whether China is eventually going to be interested in it. So what do you make of Professor Conan's elaboration on the zigzagging road to the ratification, at least coming from Washington?
Well, I pretty much concur with Dennis that because there is a lot of anti-globalization effort and rhetorics going on during the election season, and now there are debates between losers or winners during this game, and now those industries that have more intensive labor operation are really against it.
That's right.
So they are afraid of losing jobs to those partners. So the big firms are still very supportive. So
of course,
therefore,
multinationally they want to look at the markets, but from the Chinese perspective, Professor Liu, I have to ask you, there has been some different changes of mindsets toward that. At the very beginning, it was quite hostile because China was not being invited. Then China seemed to express a certain kind of interest in getting to know more information, and yet the Americans has failed so far to provide more, at least in public domain. And then we are also seeing this political year inside the U.S. just mentioned. So how does China look at the idea of TPP?
Well, I think in the first place, China's efforts for the RCEP and the U.S. efforts for the TPP are all aiming at one direction, which is regional integration.
That's right.
Based on the further division of labor and free flow of economic resources. So we are moving in one direction. There is no split about that. But the debate going on, and much of the rhetoric is triggered is who is sitting in the driver's seat, particularly for the Asia-Pacific integration. Whereas the two economic superpowers put in a sort of rivaling place. I think now the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang put it very clearly that let's go in parallel. If it is a competition, it is a friendly competition. Let's go and see, which one is going to bring the best benefit to those partners.
Professor Conan, there have been a lot of different ideas, mechanisms, platforms, terminologies being invented just over the past 2 years regarding international trade. TPP, RCEP, OBOR, one by one road, in other words, are all among those terminologies.
Right.
So are they competitive with one another, or are politicians playing cards of being competitors with one another in order to push the agenda internally? This is an interesting question.
I think it's a very
ask.
interesting question, and I believe you've hit on some key issues. We are certainly moving in a direction of a more integrated world economy, and yet we've been challenged because through the WTO negotiations on a multilateral basis have been stalled for 2 decades.
That's right.
We're not going to be able to make progress unless we do it on a more regional level, semi-multilateral level, bilateral level. So we need these kinds of, mix of many different types of arrangements to help us move to solve new issues in the global trading environment.
Is it competition about who is in the driver's seat? Or is it a real cooperation in disguise of a competition, because politicians need to internally move the agenda forward. So creating a competitor outside might not be that bad an idea. What exactly is it, Professor Conan, from your perspective?
Interesting. So I'm an economist, not a political scientist, but
sometimes, you know, economists these days have to be political scientists.
Political as well. I mean, I do think that you've hit on something really interesting, that if there is this kind of competition about who is going to step up first, that might expedite getting to agreement with something like the TPP. However, I see these arrangements as very complementary. I do think as we move forward with things like One Belt, One Road, that the approach that's being taken by China really focuses on what gave China its strength over the past 30 years. Investment in things like infrastructure, the mechanisms of trade, the logistics of trade. Countries need that right now. They need more investment in ports and bridges and infrastructure.
That's right.
And I believe that's what One Belt, One Road is focused on as it goes into Asia and Europe. And that's not really the emphasis in the TPP. So they're very complementary.
TPP is more about framework, about legal work, about the so-called legal infrastructure rather than the
rules of the
physical
game, if you will.
infrastructure itself. So which approach is likely to win or eventually be able to be taken advantage of by most of the countries? That's an interesting question.
Well, I think it's not only complementary, but also there is a lot of overlap. For example, China is excluded from the TPP, but China has 7 free trade agreements with 7 members of the TPP. So therefore, there's a overlap. But it's just that the rhetoric brought forth twice by President Obama. We cannot let countries like China to write the rules of the road. So that's rather provocative. But while China is showing a sort of lukewarm welcome to the TPP, and China shows a broad-mindedness over this. I believe that is the political rhetoric from President Obama, but that's rather provocative. But who is going to win out? Eventually it is really the material benefit. So, the winners will definitely be those countries who already have a sort of comparative advantage. For example, if you're good at, agriculture like the United States, or drug industry. So, of course they would like to push forward for this integration. They can sell more and they can enjoy more tariff the advantages. But for those weak industries that these are really afraid of globalization. They're afraid of competition from other members.
So here's the thing. We've been talking about so-called China's advantages over the other countries. One of the advantages is efficiency, and Chinese government's capability of rallying the whole nation around one idea and push it forward. Of course, political systems are very different in Washington and here in Beijing. But Professor Conan, given what Professor Liu just mentioned, which is how would you make sure it's going to be moved forward? Will Chinese side have a so-called upper hand, or this is people are looking at, especially from Southeast Asian countries, looking at the big China in the region and saying to Washington, you guys have to make this thing work at the TPP? Professor Conan.
Well, yes, I think the TPP is this mechanism that will be able to help bring in some mechanisms to reduce barriers to trade, reduce taxes, simplify in key sectors and industries, and that's going to create the kind of energy that would compel global commerce forward as it is ratified. And I think the hope is that they're going to address policies in new areas like telecommunications, services, intellectual property rights, and really provide those kind of benefits for different economies.
The political difficulties of TPP we have mentioned, but for China's OBOR, One Belt, One Road, and about the idea of building infrastructure first to accommodate all the future changes of the system also has its own challenges. For example, enormous amount of investment into infrastructure projects. We all understand that. And also, many of the countries that might be on the so-called along the New Silk Road still are experiencing some geopolitical challenges on its own. So it has its own sets of challenges. What do you think of these different kinds of approaches, Professor Liu?
I think China's approach is more pragmatic. We are not.
You're
really
not just saying it to be political right. Correct?
Actually, from my own observation, that because China has known to be more relationship-based, where the U.S. is more rule-based. So with all the neighbors and with drawing all those historical legacies between the Chinese expectation, the One Belt, One Road. So China is trying to seek a harmonious relationship while focusing on individual projects, particularly those infrastructure projects. So let's do a rule on the projects before we really build a consensus on a larger spectrum.
Is Washington going to lose out? If I could just cut off from here, going to lose out, Professor Conan, because China is already on the ground. The projects, infrastructure, already at its...
Well, look, I was discussing this with colleagues, my Chinese colleagues, at a forum at Peking University, a media forum, and no, I think that we benefit. China, we need to have a strong China in the region, and we need China to be engaging with its neighbors in a positive way, expanding economic opportunities for all sides. That's a benefit to the United States. For China's economy to be strong, they are one of our strongest import markets, one of our strongest export markets, and they have much to contribute to the region. To me, I believe it's a very positive thing that China is looking outward. 30 years ago, China wasn't looking outward.
I mean, come on, Professor Conan, you are probably one of those very open-minded intellectuals coming from the United States. You even sat down with your Chinese colleagues to have a conference about the journalism and how it impacts on the two countries' political relations. It has to take an open mind person to do that. But what about many of the others in Washington? We understand this is such a political war, whether it's TPP or whether China is a card being played during this election season. So what do you make the general atmosphere in Washington at this moment? Are you worried as a result if TPP is not being ratified by Washington? Is the United States going to lose its credibility among its many allies and partners here in the Asia-Pacific region?
Well, I don't think that the U.S. is going to lose its credibility in that way. We know that these trade agreements are very difficult to work out. If it were easy to negotiate such agreements, we would not have had a stall with the Doha round.
Time is money, Professor Conan. Time is money. Time is precious.
It's true. It's true. And I do think there's great benefit to ratifying TPP sooner and to do it with an open kind of approach, to invite new members to come in if members want to have those rules of the game, to invite new members like China to come in. I agree that the politics in Washington right now, it's hard to see beyond Election Day.
November, that's it.
November, and much will be said, and certainly politicians are playing the China card. That's fair enough. That's something that resonates with some people who are concerned about manufacturing and the significant strength that China has in the export
Talking
markets.
about manufacturing, if I could just add a question to you, Professor Conan. We have noticed the most recent report coming from the White House. President Obama was in Los Angeles last night, and he was talking about trying to establish a new manufacturing hub in the Los Angeles areas. That is about using new technology and new energy, and also to bring innovation into the overall American manufacturing. So once again, we're talking about the same thing, even though it seems to be different news. It's about how you change and restructuring your economy, whether it's about trade deals or it's about manufacturing internally. So Professor Conan, is that likely to be done before I go to Professor Liu?
This is, I think, a really exciting and interesting initiative of the president to bring private and partnerships together with the public sector in new exciting areas like energy and manufacturing. In the United States, we've been focusing more on services trade and other areas of trade. And President Obama, if there's one thing he has done, he has been very outspoken about manufacturing as being an important source of jobs and growth and dynamism. So I think that's an exciting initiative on the president's part.
All right, Professor Liu, what is likely to be China's attitude, whether there are political challenges back in Washington about the TPP or not?
Well, China has its own unique way of handling integration. We always maintain the principle that we keep those differences while we try to prevent those differences from interfering with the common interest. So all the Belt and Road program is really filled with projects. And also you can see that we are not really creating a 30-chapter rule for the Belt and Road program, but rather, we have a joint statement. Okay, I want to be friends, and don't worry. So we're going to have projects later, or we have a specific project. We are not ready to be full friends yet. Okay, let's go ahead. So it's a more practical and pragmatic approach.
Pragmatism,
so, that's
yes,
right.
Coming from the Chinese
but
side.
China, I think China has already a ready example to learn from TPP. If we can combine relationship-based operation together with rule-based operation, so China can be even stronger and more competitive.
Well, they are not at least on the two opposite sides of one thing, or they could be all into one?
Well, there is possibility because actually the Chinese RCEP is really having an open door, to welcome US to join if they conform to the standard, and equally TPP is also keeping an open door, not only for China but for even Central Asia countries to join. So eventually we're going to see a more integrated Asia Pacific, if not the world.
Well, it's always wonderful to have two economists sitting in the studio. The world could always be brighter at the end of the day. For a political scientist, probably it's a different story. But thank you so much for the both of you for being with us. Professor Denise Conan, coming from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and also Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insights CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.